Kia ora Aotearoa. The true demarcation of power in a late-stage capitalism, liberal progressive democracy is the 1% richest plus their 9% enablers versus the 90% rest of us. Welcome to the Bradbury Group, New Zealand's best weekly political argument. I'm your host, the editor of the daily blog, Martin Bradbury. Bomber to my comrades, Mr. Bradbury if you're nasty. My pronouns are us and we. Coming up on this evening's show, the in-studio political panel all-stars tonight are former New Zealand First Minister and National Party MP Henare, Waatea Press Gallery senior journalist and former National Party MP Chlöe Hauiti, and from the AUT School of Communication, former Alliance Party candidate Professor Wayne Hope. As part of our new show format, we have a weekly one-on-one in 10-minute live interview with a party leader. This week it is Green Party co-leader Chloe Swarbrick. Before all that, however, is this week's War on News. Comrades, this week, Bishop Brian Tamaki's weird Christo-fascist march up Queen Street against all other religions ended up looking like an odd Grindr profile picture. The bishop raged against foreign religions, which he named as Muslim, Buddhist, Sikh, and Palestinian. I'm no theologian, but last time I checked, Palestinian wasn't a religion, so 25% of what he's raging against isn't actually the thing he's supposed to be targeting, which ironically seems like an Israeli army-level civilian casualty fail rate. When his Christo-fascist brown shirts for Christ aren't bravely beating up librarians and storytelling drag queens, they are on the street harassing other people of different faiths? Look, I don't care what magical flying invisible wizard you believe in. This is a liberal progressive democracy. You are free to believe what you want, but when you start trying to invoke religious violence on the street, shouldn't you be forced to shut up? How does Brian constantly make Jesus and God so uncool and malicious? Talking of cool, uncool and malicious, David Seymour sulking over his Oxford debate media coverage is the funniest thing you'll read this week. He whined that the New Zealand media only focused on him losing and not the amazing speech he gave, which kind of sounds like the thing a loser says to deflect from losing, but on this point, maybe David is right, and we should focus on how right after the Oxford debate that he lost, he went on a speaking tour with Free Market Atlas Network lunatics where he defended tobacco legislation by saying, and I quote, "Smokers are fiscal heroes and people should light up to save their government's balance sheet." Okay. So David goes on an Atlas Network speaking tour while denying having anything to do with the Atlas Network, and then tells right-wing audiences that smokers are fiscal heroes because they die and save the state money. But he's whining about media attention on him losing the Oxford debate. In the kind words of the Right Honourable Dame Jacinda Ardern, he's such an arrogant prick. And finally, in this week's War on News, to everyone's open-mouthed shock, Donald Trump decided to, just bomb Iran's nuclear facilities, basically because Israel has wanted to do it for the last 30 years. No legitimate preemptive threat, no legal justification, just respect my authority. Comrades, I have zero time for theocracy, whether it's Christian, Muslim, Hindu, or Palestinian, according to Bishop Brian, because I don't believe religion should dictate our politics. I have very little sympathy for the Iranian theocracy. They beat girls to death for not wearing headscarves, but I understand how this mutilation came to be, and that is because the US caused a coup in 1953 to steal Iranian oil. Yes, the Iranian theocracy is a terrible thing, but it's a terrible thing caused by an even more evil thing: the American military-industrial complex. So while I have zero time for the Iranian theocracy, I have even less time for American exceptionalism. Let's be very clear. There is no legal justification for the war on Iran that Israel and America have embarked upon. What America and Israel have done here by starting an illegal war with Iran is that they have walked away from the rules-based order. How dare we lecture Russia for starting a war with the Ukraine if we in the West do it as well? We are all going to die on a burning planet thanks to the lies of the petro-industrial complex and their war-mongering polluter mates. To quote the great Mike Hosking, happy days. This the in-studio political panel all-stars up shortly, whānau. But first, this week's one-on-one in 10 with Green Party co-leader Chloe Swarbrick. Kia ora, comrade. Welcome to the show, and thank you for being available to the Fourth Estate. Your democracy is grateful.
Kia ora. Thanks for having me, Bomber.
I want to start tonight, if I may, Chloe, on this appalling military aggression by Donald Trump, enabling Israel in strikes against Iran and then bombing Iran's nuclear program themselves. We are quick and righteous in denouncing Russia for walking away from the rules-based order. Where is that courage when Western allies are breaching those exact same standards?
I mean, you said it well. Yeah, I think that this really goes to show the unfortunate walking back that our current government is doing by virtue of not acting on our historical record of standing on our independent foreign policy and being really crystal clear about where human rights need to be upheld. You know, there is one entity in the Middle East that definitively has nuclear weapons, and we know that that is Israel.
Right.
We have seen, as you say, the government be incredibly quick to act, including the last government, when it comes to Russia's illegal invasion of and occupation of Ukraine. And, you know, that's part of the reason that I drafted my illegal occupation of Palestine sanctions bill with the exact same approach that was taken in that legislation. Given that what we're seeing currently unfold in Palestine is, if not far worse.
We had Helen Clark on last week's show, and she was adamant that there is no legal justification for these strikes and argued that while this is occurring, Gaza and the West Bank are under even greater military violence threat. What should New Zealand be doing here? Should we be expelling the Israeli ambassador?
I mean, we should have done that a long, long time ago when it became abundantly apparent that Israel was not abiding by the international rules-based order. Who are we to say that we expect human rights to be upheld if we're not willing to stand by and ask for them to be upheld ourselves? So yes, Bomber, the government should have moved a heck of a lot quicker. I mean, if we just look at the comparisons with how the government moved with regard to, and, you know, this government, when in opposition, called for far faster movement when it came to Russia. But we're not willing to apply those same standards when, as you say, it comes to the actions of our supposed allies. But friends don't let friends abuse human rights. At the end of the day, who do we want to be as Aotearoa New Zealand? What history do we want to hand down to our kids? What is the legacy that we want to have? What we are currently witnessing, particularly in Gaza, is a live-streamed genocide where people who have been made refugees in their own lands are being mercilessly carpet-bombed. I don't think that there's ever been a more compelling case for the international community to be crystal clear about what we stand for.
Preach. Our Prime Minister was in Beijing meeting Chinese leader Xi Jinping and made the extraordinary comment that China is not working with Russia, Iran and North Korea to undermine the West, as alleged by NATO's top official. He's now at the NATO summit. How will New Zealand's confused position be taken by other NATO officials? And who do you think is a bigger threat to New Zealand's interests, China or America?
You put me on the spot there for a really low stakes statement on our foreign policy and position. But hey, look, this actually goes to something else which the Greens released today, which was some independent expert legal advice that we commissioned ourselves because it was clear that the government had not done the work. When we spotted in the May budget lockup that the $200 million that they had allocated for fossil fuel subsidies, a $200 million handout to get more gas production happening in this country, which their own regulatory impact statement says is not going to come online until at least earliest 2034, so it's not a short-term measure. Our independent legal advice showed that that is a breach of the Agreement on Climate Change, Trade and Sustainability. Something the Honourable Minister Todd Macleay, was championing and trumpeting back in November of last year, but it took them less than 6 months to breach it themselves. And Iceland will be around the table at that NATO summit, so perhaps the Prime Minister could tell them that not only is he spitting in the face of that agreement, but he's intent on pouring oil, coal and gas on the climate crisis fire.
The great Keith Locke once argued New Zealand's foreign affairs position should be friend to all, enemy to none. What do you believe?
I think that Keith said it well. And I think that this is a really interesting comment to reflect on in the context of how the Green Party are accused every few months, every few years of moving away from our roots or our legacy. And I just ask people to reflect on our same 4 core charter principles, which has been the same the entire time that the Green Party has existed. What differentiates us from Green parties around the world is a commitment, obviously, to Te Tiriti o Waitangi, which filters through all of those. But we believe in ecological wisdom, recognition of the fact that resources are finite. Even those resources that do regenerate need time and space, and God forbid some planning, Shane Jones, in order to regenerate. Secondly, social responsibility, known derogatorily on the internet as social justice, which is about how we go about ensuring that if we understand the central premise that these resources are somewhat finite, then we ensure everybody has access to their basic means to be able to participate in society. That's what real freedom actually looks like, those basic economic means. Then non-violence, we're hippies, we don't like going to war, but I think if you dig into that a little bit more, as Keith did, this is about how you create systems that don't neglect people who further down the track go, hey, this thing doesn't work for me. Fourthly, appropriate decision making, which is why we're such nerds for local government, and obviously very opposed to much of the attacks that this government is making on genuine localism.
The latest numbers on the economy paint a dire picture for the pro-growth government. ANZ economists today have slashed their June quarter GDP growth forecast to just 0.1%, down from 0.4%. 500,000 Kiwis need food banks each month. Fresh data from Auckland Council shows only 50% of building consents actually start being built within 6 months of the consent, meaning there will be a huge lag in construction, and government hopes that higher export earnings from dairy and meat would flow through into economic growth has been hit by news from the banks that farmers are using that extra cash to pay off debt and are buying new tractors at the slowest rate in 24 years. I put to you, Chloe, that a steep economic downturn is coming for New Zealand and that the government's privatisation agenda will only make it worse.
100% Bomber. I mean, look, the rhetoric that we were hearing from the get-go from this government was trickle-down economics reheated. And we've seen it in their austerity playbook, whereby they have defunded public services, waited to watch till they wither and fail, and then attempt to kind of privatise that. And that's what we're seeing currently happening with the contracting for private hospitals. And what we know happens when those steps are taken is that profit becomes a motive. And this government is, in response to my questions in the House, ridiculed me for pointing out that that increases the cost of living for regular New Zealanders.
Yes.
You only need to look at the experience with the former national government partially privatising the electricity sector, which in turn has increased costs and reduced the public good initiative or incentive to introduce renewables into the mix.
Totally.
So it really, really boggles my mind. And this is part of the reason that we put on the table as the Greens, because quite frankly, Bomber, we were sick of just complaining about things and, unpicking all of the logic and the illogic for our Green budget in May of this year, where we showed that it is entirely feasible and entirely possible for us to be a country that extends our belief in universal basic services, the kinds of things that once upon a time were seen as impossible, the likes of free hospitals and free schooling. Well, we should also have free early childhood education and free GPs and free dental care. Yes, we are going to have to pay for it. That means being grown-ups about the reality that, of course, there are trade-offs when we're making decisions in our economy. That means that we are going to have a fairer tax system, and we're going to have more sophisticated conversations about debt. That's the reason that we released our alternative fiscal strategy just last week or the week before, where we showed that international debt markets take far more sophisticated variables into account than our government currently does with its own self-imposed fiscal straitjacket, which is totally divorced from real-world economic capacity, which really goes to your core point, Bomber. For all of the rhetoric about growth, this government has actively been making decisions that are kneecapping that growth and indeed productivity, to the extent that we're now seeing 191 New Zealanders, 3/4 of them between the ages of 18 to 45, leaving this country every single day. That's a travesty.
Finally, your thoughts on the ACT Party's social media campaign targeting critics of their regulatory standards bill. Why would the party of free speech actively attempt to strangle others' free speech?
Nailed it. That's it really, isn't it? I mean, Look, I've been put on breakfast panels and debates with David Seymour since I was 22 years old.
And you beat him, every time. You beat him every. You do. I'm keeping count. I'm keeping count.
I know. Well, I was on your show back in 2016 when I was running for local body elections, but nonetheless, we digress. But what I have seen time and again is a man whose rhetoric is championing freedom of speech, but when push really comes to shove, he attacks people individually, personally, and on an ad hominem basis. And in addition to that, he can give it, but he can't take it. Yeah. And I just frankly, like at this point in the way that politics is working in modernity, New Zealanders deserve a heck of a lot better.
Preach. Thank you, comrade. We will see the Green Party leadership on the show next month. Thank you so much, Chloe.
Catch you next time.
Cheers. Okay, now to our studio political panel all-stars. Our first panellist is a former New Zealand First Minister and National Party MP. He's been paying for those sins ever since. He's the reformed Darth Vader from West Auckland. Tau Henare. Kia ora, comrade. Welcome to the show. One word to describe the week, please, sir.
Oh, it's great.
Great.
It's great because I wake up in the morning.
Yes.
And early in the morning, I get to see my moko. He come over and I get to hug him.
Awesome.
It's great.
Our next panellist is a former National Party MP and the current Press Gallery senior reporter for Waatea, the mightiest of the mighty, the indomitable Claudette Hauiti. Kia ora, comrade. Welcome to the show. Oh, I think you're on mic. I think you're on mute. I think you're on mute? Somebody's on mute.
Kia koutou katoa.
There we go. Kia ora, comrade. One word to describe the week, please.
For me, the one kupu would be exhausting.
Yeah.
Exhausting policies and rhetoric and narrative attacking Māori. Actually, somebody else from Charoa had actually said that it was assaulting.
Yeah. And last but certainly not
confusing or assaulting.
And last but certainly not least, he's a former Alliance Party candidate and the co-director of the Journalism, Media and Democracy Research Centre at the Hauiti School of Communication, author of the best climate change book in New Zealand. He's also my neighbour, the ever-brilliant Professor Wayne Hope. Kia ora, comrade. Welcome to the show.
Good evening, Bomber.
One word to describe the week, please, sir.
Uncertainty, and I mean radical uncertainty.
Let's kick things off with the show. Issue 1, the Israel-US attack on Iran and what New Zealand should be doing. Issue 2, Trans-Tasman Resources tells iwi they have to engage with them whether they like it or not. And issue 3 tonight, Shane Jones and his drill baby drill campaign. Let's kick things off with issue 1 and the extraordinary escalation of conflict on Iran, with America launching airstrikes against 3 nuclear facilities in Israel, stepping up its ongoing attacks. Acting Prime Minister David Seymour told reporters yesterday there was no benefit in rushing to a judgment regarding the US attack. Isn't that position pretty gutless?
Yeah, it is. And step back a bit. Here we have a country that has weapons of mass destruction.
Right.
Telling another nation, you're not allowed to have weapons of mass destruction.
What?
And while our partner, Israel, has weapons of mass destruction, we're going to bomb the shit out of you. You know, I mean, the professor is absolutely right. There's uncertainty.
Yeah.
And the uncertainty for me comes from a madman in both spheres, one in America and one in the Middle East. You know, and I don't know who's going to win, but it ain't us.
Follow-up question. Your old boss, Winston Peters, has an enormous foreign affairs experience, and we all sort of tip our hat to him. How do you think he is navigating New Zealand through these geopolitical tensions?
Well, he's not. I mean, and he is, let me put it really blunt. He is wriggling his way through this debacle.
Right.
He doesn't want to piss the Americans off.
Right. Yep.
He doesn't want to piss the Israelis off.
Yeah.
I mean, what sanctions have we got with Israel? 2 idiot right-wing
In the West
ministers
Bank, yeah.
are not allowed to travel. Well, whoop-de-doo.
Yeah.
You know, how about the 100,000 people that are dead in the Gaza Strip, the world's biggest but smallest prison?
Yeah.
Because that's what it is. It's just one big refugee
Open
camp.
air,
And
yeah.
it's, I mean, people go to aid stations to get shot, not to get food,
Right.
you know?
Claudette, Prime Minister Chris Luxon was in Beijing claiming China wasn't helping Iran, Russia and North Korea undermine the West, despite that being NATO's claim. And he is now at the NATO summit. How do you think the Prime Minister is handling this from a press gallery perspective?
Well, the corridor is that he's struggling and that he's very new and that he's naive would be a harsh word, but you can tell that he's out of his depth when it comes to geopolitical issues across a wide, and not just in this particular sphere, but across the different areas. Now, in terms of his relationship with China, it was really interesting that he had actually said that China, New Zealand, Aotearoa New Zealand, he didn't use the word Aotearoa, New Zealand and China are relating, there is a different type of relationship there. It is one that is more based on culture. Well, funny that, Nanaia Mahuta was the one that actually implemented an Indigenous policy for international foreign trade and exchange, and that worked really well with China, and that is now known as the Taniwha and the Dragon. But back here domestically, the Prime Minister and his coalition partners are not wanting to have anything to do with Te Ao Māori in terms of culture and anything to do with separate funding, but then they can use this cultural relationship as a way to forge better export and trade with China particularly. Now, back here with Minister Seymour at Postcab with the media, you can tell that he was also out of depth when it came to what was unfolding in the Middle East. That today in the House, when questions were levelled at the Prime Minister, he should have taken those parti. Instead, we have the Foreign Minister replying on behalf of the Prime Minister, which really goes to show that David Seymour is not being given that responsibility because he's very much out of his depth.
Follow-up question, how does New Zealand balance our trade needs with China and our security needs with America? The Māori Party are calling for neutrality. Is that a conversation worth having?
Oh, yeah, neutrality, absolutely. I want to go back to that comment that you had made about friends to all and enemies to none. Actually, in this changing world, we do need to be friends to some, enemies to some, if we want to ensure that Indigenous peoples across the world are safe. We do need to make sure, we do need to put a line in the sand and say, like we did with the Ukraine, that it is not what we want to see in Gaza. If that puts us offside with some of these powers, then so be it. We can't be friends to all and enemies to none. We must show a little bit more strength. We might be miles away, and we heard that from Winston Peters and from David Seymour. We're miles and miles away, but let's be the strong country we know that we can be. We must be friends to some and enemies to others.
Professor Hope, America instigated a coup against the Iranian people in 1953. They are now bombing the very regime they created because of that coup. Does Donald Trump understand any of that history?
Yes, but it's a deeper history than that even, Bomber. You're quite right. There was a coup in 1953 to get rid of the Mossadegh regime.
Democratically elected?
And, of course, underpinned, of course, by Shell. And
Big Oil, right?
Okay, and
BP.
BP from the UK side. And who was put in his place? Well, it was the Shah, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Well, some listeners might remember that the Shah was really keen on developing the bomb. He really, really wanted top-end nuclear facilities, no question about that. And he was constantly badgering the US for that to happen. Then we had the revolution of '79. It was a polyglot revolution. A lot of people were involved, a lot of factions and groups, but it was the Ayatollahs that won out. Now, what's interesting about that is that Islam, as it was interpreted by the Ayatollahs in 1979, was resolutely against nuclear weapons.
That's right. That's right.
In fact, they
It was immoral.
They issued a fatwa against it. So you might well think, what's changed their mind? Well, we have to go fast forward to the early 1980s or 1980 itself. Remember Saddam Hussein? Anybody?
Yeah.
The US used to support Saddam Hussein.
That's right. Propped him up, gave him guns.
And Saddam Hussein invaded Iran.
Yes.
And he used chemical warfare on Iranian troops and civilians in a really systematic way.
And that was the reason why they thought they needed a bomb, right? Protection?
Not quite so crudely, Bomber, but the rulers of Iran started to think, well, what kind of deterrence are we going to develop? And so they got involved in what's called uranium enrichment.
Yes.
And so what they were really doing there is making people think that, they might be on the threshold of a bomb, in which case Iranian negotiating powers would be stronger. It's always important to realise just how beleaguered a country Iran is. I mean, I took a note just before I came on this evening, and Iran is surrounded by states with atomic weapons, right? India, Pakistan, China, Russia, and of course Israel. And Iran is also surrounded by US military bases in Qatar, Iraq, Turkey, and Uzbekistan. And some of those bases will have nuclear facilities, although we're not absolutely sure. And then to the south of Iran, out in the ocean, we've got nuclear-armed US aircraft carriers, right, and submarines.
Yeah.
So
who's the aggressor here?
Well, I'm just trying to explain. Iran,
not Iran.
Iran is an encircled state who's been pushed into a corner to develop uranium enrichment because of the caprices of US imperialism over decades.
Follow-up question. How much of this conflict do you think is driven by Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's need to keep constant conflict so as to avoid accountability from Israel's own judicial and political processes?
It's about half of it. The other half is this extraordinary ideological zeal backed up by geomilitary power to get rid of the Iranian regime and to kind of break Iran up, just like Iraq was broken up. That's kind of their game plan. The likelihood of that game plan coming to fruition is about zero, to be honest.
Right.
Because there's extraordinary unity among Iranians.
Especially now.
Including those that are really critical of the theocratic regime as well. Yeah. Because what's happened to Iran the last few weeks is that their territorial integrity has been fundamentally threatened.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's an existential crisis for them.
Quick round to everyone. Po, is that sound you hear, that sound, listen carefully, is that David Lange spinning in his grave at the death of New Zealand's independent foreign policy?
No, it'll have to be a pretty big grave. and how do you spin something like that? Look, bro, I mean, sorry, David. We haven't had an independent foreign policy for ages. Yeah. And we kid ourselves that we are above everybody else. But, I mean, shit, we went to Vietnam, for God's sake.
Claudette, independent foreign policy, is it dead? Claudette?
We've never really had an independent foreign policy. We're too small and we've always attached ourselves to other allies internationally. I think now is the time that we should start to look at having an independent foreign policy.
Wayne?
I don't quite agree with Tao. I think we're very small and we don't have a lot of room to manoeuvre. And at the moment, we've sort of got two masters we have to try and serve, China and the United States. But we do have one thing in our favour. Because we're a relatively intelligent country and relatively small, we've got soft power on our side. And it means we can support things like non-proliferation nuclear treaties. It means we can support ecological matters. I mean, remember back in the days when Kirk was the Prime Minister, we sent a boat with a cabinet minister.
That's right.
To
nuclear testing.
Protest against nuclear testing in the atmosphere, by the way, back in those days. I mean, that was really effective, and that definitely had an impact. So I don't want to overcook the idea that we have an independent foreign policy, but I think we can finesse our soft power. Because if you've got soft power, it means you're not a threat to other people, and it means you can say a few things that bigger powers can't say.
Comrades, we must move on to issue 2. The head of Trans-Tasman Resources, who just won a contract to mine off the South Taranaki seabed using the rigged fast-track process, a project that had been denied previously many times by the Environment Court, has told a local meeting that iwi must engage with them whether iwi want them or not. Claudette, a mining corporation opposed relentlessly by iwi, telling iwi they must engage with them. Is that ever going to work with Māori?
Well, ko te mea tuatahi, me tuku mihi ki ngā mana whenua o te rohe o te whenua o Taranaki. E tūkaha koutou katoa ki te whawhai o tēnei kaupapa. So, interestingly, Trans-Tasman has been there for a very long time, for a couple of decades now. And when they say that iwi need to engage with them, what they really mean is that they don't like the way iwi is engaging with them. Iwi is engaging with them in the courts, in the EPA, and in protest. So while they may have won this particular fight, this is Trans-Tasman in terms of the fast track, the battle is not over yet. So Trans-Tasman might have very, very deep pockets, but mana whenua has very, very deep roots in the whenua, and they're not going anywhere, and they will continue to protest probably through the courts. So it doesn't matter how much we have or how much legislation there will always be protest by iwi. So again, when Trans-Tasman say, these people, they got to, start talking to us, well, they're talking to you all right, you just don't like the message. You don't like the way in which that message has been delivered.
Right. Follow-up question. How is being told you have to work together constructive engagement, and do you see other companies who are fighting iwi environmentally trying this tactic?
So, well, I don't know who's actually saying we've got to work together on mining and drilling of whenua and moana. I mean, there are some iwi that might want to consult. There are some iwi in hapu in Te Waipounamu, as an example, around Moeraki, who might want to investigate that, but then in Taranaki, they don't want to do that. So there is no blanket, all iwi or hapu should be doing this. It is a case-by-case, hapu, marae, iwi. And so it just happens that in Taranaki, this is what Trans-Tasman are facing. Now, how they operate here at Taranaki, how they operate may be very different from what is happening in Te Waipounamu. It's exactly the same way that Te Whānau Apanui were operated on when that a few years ago, and Tau will be able to give the exact date, when Te Whānau Apanui stopped the drilling off the coast of Te Whānau Apanui around Takaha. So it is not a one-stop blanket, and I'm not 100% sure who is saying we've got to work on this together and come to some kind of compromise. There's no compromise for Māori when it comes to whenua.
Right. Professor Wayne Hope, Māori have cultural memory of the first wave of white settler capitalist exploitation resource taking. They have the flax roots knowledge of what sustainability and environmental protection looks like. It is no wonder that international right-wing think tanks always aim to attack Indigenous rights first to enable the next generation of exploitative resource stripping. You've written an incredible book talking about this recently. What are your thoughts?
Well, my first thought about what's happening in Taranaki is that it's sort of like the land wars all over again. It's sort of like a new form of colonialism, resource colonialism, coming from a transnational company based in Australia. So it should be resisted on that basis, of course. The other point you made, though, this is very important when we look at climate justice activism around the world. It's Indigenous leaders and Indigenous leaders, intellectuals who work with Indigenous groups around the planet, who are at the front line because they've had experience through their genealogies of what extractivism looks like. Silver mining in South America, oil extraction in northern Canada, more recently tar oil extraction. So they've got a collective intergenerational memory of what it's all about. And what that means is that it provides you with a historical framework for coming up against climate crisis. And the climate crisis is not a crisis in its own right. It's something which is generated by dependence on fossil fuels and a global capitalist system which is dependent on fossil fuels and a poisonous value chain, right? So now the whole planet future is at stake, whereas maybe back in the 1900s it was more local Indigenous cultures whose future was at stake. But now their concerns of the past have now become planetary concerns, and that's why we must give due weight and credit to some of the top intellectuals from that quarter. Kyle White from Canada's one of my go-to figures. He's really top end. Yep.
Follow-up question. We are seeing rapacious fossil fuel and mining company interests pushed at the expense of the environment. Is corporate power beating people power now?
Well, I mean, the main threat to the climate, as I said before, comes from transnational corporations, not just fossil fuel companies and natural gas companies, but the capital markets around them. So, that's pretty significant. But the fact is, we can put this into the public realm too. We've got youth activism against climate change caused by fossil fuels. We've got Indigenous activism, as I said before. And I think that what's happening in Taranaki around Trans-Tasman Resources, that's part of that too, because this whole seabed mining project is displacing what was anticipated to be a major wind farm project, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So isn't this a classic example where renewable energy has been trumped by dangerous fossil fuel energy? So not only are the iwi on the front line on the local issue, they're on the front line on climate change issue at the same time.
Tau, Matua Shane Jones stood aside from the Seabed mining decision. Does that suggest he had a conflict of interest?
Yeah, of course it does. And he's up to his neck in it. And all you have to do is follow the money.
Right.
All you need to do is just follow the money. But, this Trans-Tasman, have they not learned anything over the last 20 years about working with people? I mean, that's all you need to do. Okay, you're gonna come up against people who don't like you and who don't like your product. That's cool.
Yeah.
But at least try and work with them. Don't stand there and say you must work with us,
right,
while we clean your seabed out. Okay, so I mean, it's look. It's 2025, not 1825.
Yeah. Follow-up question. We are only getting a 2% return on these royalties. Why do we get a pittance while the mining companies make all the profits and leave us with the environmental degradation?
It's got a lot to do with the Regulatory Standards Bill, because that's in it as well.
Yes.
What that's about is our government, and I don't really care who it is, but our government selling us down the road.
Yeah.
I mean, we've always had, not only now, but we've always had a pretty poor return on investment.
Yeah.
And I know that the world companies, they invest their billions of dollars, blah, 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 but we deserve to be recognised for that taking, and I just think that it's pretty poor economics.
Quick round. Will we continue to see clashes between iwi and their environmental concerns versus corporations? Claudette?
Can I just say this? When you talk about Indigenous people on a global scale fighting corporate greed or corporate climate change, Indigenous peoples understand that there is a connection between the mahi that they do within their own areas, and it has a resonance with other Indigenous peoples. Indigenous peoples like Māori start local. It becomes global, but to focus inwards on their own rohe first. So while I understand, I hear that, that there is a larger climate crisis, a global one, make no mistake about it, don't chuck Indigenous peoples in amongst the global fighters. They fight local, which then becomes global. And so it is a protection, not a fight. We're protecting. That's the kupu from Indigenous peoples. And while we are in that protection, of course, there is that kupu whawhai. But first and foremost, it's about protecting.
You should be an MP.
I think I got kicked out.
You were too good for them, Claudette. Professor Wayne Hope, is this something we're going to see a lot more of? As these companies try it on, as they try to take more resources, will they keep coming up against local environmental protests, including from Māori?
Well, no question. There's hundreds of these struggles all around the planet. And the local and the global are two sides of exactly the same coin here.
Tom?
No, absolutely. I mean, look, I haven't been opposed to getting a bit of oil out of the ground, blah, 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 blah. And I think that's what a lot of people think. But as we move forward and you start seeing what's around the corner, I think I used to smoke. I used to smoke like a chimney.
Yep.
I don't now.
Yep.
And it's the same. It's the same corridor. It's the same sort of thinking. You know. And my time's running out.
Right.
And I hope my moko is going to be living in a place where there's plenty of usable energy.
Yeah.
I even went out to buy some solar lights.
Yes.
And I actually thought very well of myself when I did that. Yes. I didn't think I would ever do that.
Yeah, but you can change because you need...
because you have
realities.
to.
That's right.
Because it's the reality.
Yeah. Comrades, we must move on to issue 3, and that is Mātua Shane Jones at Scrutiny Week this week, wearing a Make New Zealand Great Again drill baby drill hat. Professor Hope, Mātua Shane Jones claim that we are importing more Indonesian dirty coal because limp-wristed greenies keep wanting flower power has already been debunked. That nonsense has been knocked over. Can Mātua Shane Jones have an adult discussion on mining, because all it seems he's capable of doing is starting culture wars against the Greens?
Well, I can't see it happening. He looks to me like he sort of should be living in the 1880s in New Zealand. A world of extractivism, coal mining, gold mining, when it was believed that whatever we could extract was the basis for the economy before we got into sophisticated agriculture. Wow, he's a fossil, man. Like, it's a blast from the past. And what I find really fascinating about him is he's taking on these culture war tropes just to deliberately rile people. Well, come on, you've got people you're representing. Be serious, will you?
Even Mātua Shane, even if Mātua Shane struck oil tomorrow, the time frames involved to get it out of the ground take us well past 2030. I think Chloe was saying 2034. The date by which the International Energy Agency has forecast the world will face a staggering glut of oil. So this can't make the money he believes it will make for us.
Shane could have been somebody, but he's lazy. And a lot of the rhetoric that I hear from him is about being lazy. It's to wear a cap that says "Make New Zealand Great Again." You could have at least said make Aotearoa great again, but he didn't because he doesn't think it's necessary. I think he's such a sellout. You know, and admittedly, a lot of people still think that about me, and that's cool. I cop that because that's part of the territory I bought into.
Sure.
You know, so I accept that. But when you're one of your own, and I mean, this is the guy that wrote the RMA. Basically, what was and admittedly, it needed a bit of a tidy up.
Yep.
Everything needs a tidy up.
Yep.
But you just don't. I think he's sold out, and I think he's sold out to the likes of Tallies and the likes of big corporates that pay him and his mates with food, with drink, with the good times. I tell you, it is like the professor says. It's like 1880. It's like 1840. More so in France, and we all know what happened in France.
Can you hear the people singing songs of
Exactly.
angry men? Claudette, Matua Shane has been to Singapore and told the oil and gas industry there that he will open all of New Zealand up for mining and gas exploration, not just the areas that have been designated, which is a policy change he hasn't even told New Zealanders about yet. Is mining the New Zealand economy's saviour?
Well, it is according to Matua Shane Jones, and of course he had a carrot as well too when he went over to that summit of something like $200 million to encourage them to come to Aotearoa to start mining and drilling and having a poke around. You know, so he says that he wants all of the NEFs to come back from Australia to work the mines here. So he that's what he's telling Te Ao Māori when he goes around, that he wants the mahi to be driven up here. I mean, he did really well with the provincial growth fund previously, and you know, in driving up employment, particularly around jobs for nature, that with the provincial growth fund amongst our rangatahi, and that's, you know, one of the things that he wants to do here. But I think he's at the wrong end of history here. Everybody can see what he's trying to do. Nobody, apart from his core supporters and the coalition within the coalition government, really, back what he's saying. I do want to talk about Matua Shane Jones here, but I do want to ask Tau Henare, though. Has Tau Henare ever been told to enoho by his hapu and the iwi of Ngāpuhi? Because Shane Jones was told to enoho when it came time for the Ngāpuhi settlement. So I think that although it's a different type of subject, it's actually the same thing because he's getting flack from his own people. So I want to know if Tau Henare has been told to sit down.
I've been told a lot of things in my life. Look, about the Ngāpuhi settlement.
Yes.
I actually agree that there should be a double settlement, one on cultural redress and one big one on economic redress. But you do not, in any stretch of negotiation skills, tell the other people that this is the way you're going to negotiate.
Right.
So I think that what he's done is go against, and so are the Nats actually, gone against a long, successful road of how to negotiate.
Yes.
And this is not negotiation.
No.
And the other thing is they want New Zealand First want a bill.
That's right.
That tells Ngāpuhi how to suck eggs. Right. Basically.
Yeah.
And my thing is this is all smoke and mirrors, because you know what I read today? It's a private member's bill. And you know how long a private member's bill takes to be taken out of the cookie jar. And, you know, when it's a private member's bill,
It means nothing.
It means nothing.
Exactly.
And what he's doing is grandstanding.
Yes.
What he's doing is, and good on Peter Tipene for saying, well, Ngāti Hine, we will not negotiate with the Crown as long as you have that intransigeable position that you have.
Exactly.
Go screw yourselves.
Quick round. If
Well,
there was...
the other thing about that is that Matua Shane Jones wants to also, along with the coalition government, Paul Goldsmith, has said that ceding sovereignty, Ngāpuhi or Te Whānau Apanui says that they have an agree to disagree clause in their settlement around who ceded sovereignty. Now, we know that Ngāpuhi never ceded sovereignty.
Yeah.
Apparently, that's off the table if there is any settlement. Goldsmith says that's off the table, and Shane Jones reckons that's off the table as well too. So apparently his people didn't cede, they ceded sovereignty, or, you know, they're rejecting the fact that Ngāpuhi did not cede sovereignty. So that's also a bit of an issue for Ngāti Hine, for Peter Tipene, not just the one large natural settlement, but also the fact that they cannot have in their clause that they did not cede sovereignty.
No. Quick round. If there was so much interest in gas exploration, why did all those companies that held licenses hand them back because they couldn't find anything? Professor Wainhope.
I think one of the key things with gas exploration and mineral exploration generally is what happens in the future really depends on world market prices for what's being extracted. So some of the promises that are being made in these projects are fly in the sky until the world economy pans out.
Yeah. To, what if there was so much of if so many companies wanted to do this, why'd they all hand their licenses back in after they couldn't find anything?
You know why? Because they found out that New Zealand is one of the newest countries on the planet. And it hasn't been where it is for millions and millions and millions of years, and it hasn't built up the coal resources, the uranium resources, the all sorts of resources that other countries have.
Yes.
Because they are there, they are where they were billions of years ago. And there's a lot of dead trees in that billion years. So they get a lot of coal.
Right.
They get a lot of resources. You know, John Key said to me, geez, those fellas are lucky, eh? I said, what do you mean? He said, they can dig up their backyard and we can't.
Right.
And he wasn't talking about not being able to. There's nothing under there.
Right.
You know, I mean, you got a bit of coal. And everybody's got that.
Yep.
Well, look at all the coal mines that have closed down over the last 100 years.
Exactly. There's nothing left.
And we've mined most of the gold, right?
That's what I said before. The 1880s was the apogee of extraction in New Zealand. You know,
That's right.
And Murray got the brunt of it.
Claudette, if this was so popular, why did they all hand their licenses back?
Yep.
Well, you know, because there's nothing in them there hills.
Yeah.
Is what
Right.
Is why they handed them all back. Now, so that was that. But now there seems to be some chase on for the lithium in them there
That's right.
hills.
That's right.
But and of course there's a big, you know, pushback from iwi around that as well too. But there's been no actual tangible research into how much we have, and of course we've had lots of reports around the environmental impact of mining for that lithium, but just how much lithium is there? I mean, you know, there's nothing there in the hills.
Yeah. Comrades, we need to wrap the show with a final word. We're almost out of time. Tell your final word this week, please, sir.
Oh, go hard, whānau. I mean, you know, you only live once. And I'm hopeful that I leave behind for my moko a little sentence that's what the old man was up to. You know, that's what I did in the war. I wasn't in the war.
Preach. Claudette, your final word this week, please.
So just a reminder to our whānau that the local body elections are coming up, and to participate, we have a democratic right to vote, and so participate in local body elections and then in the general elections, but also to make sure that we keep an eye on that regulatory standards bill. It has closed and it's coming into submission, so good luck. The word on the street is that there's over 130,000 submissions. I actually think that there might be more. The official number has not been released yet, but also to ensure that our data counts, because the national census is going to be scrapped in 2030. So make sure that our data counts everywhere, whānau.
Professor Wayne Hope, your final word this week, please, sir.
Well, I started off with uncertainty at the beginning of this program. Let me take you back to 1914, the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. Probably nobody alive here remembers that. But when that happened, nobody in Europe was expecting a multi-front war and 10 million dead, right? Nobody. And I feel that we're at the same stage of uncertainty here. What's going to happen in the next few years, I don't know. I've never been more scared in my life, apart from the Cuban Missile Crisis, although I was only 6 years old at the time. So I feel as though we're kind of on the eve of World War I all over again. So how's that for a chirpy ending?
Certainly keeps me going. Thank you, comrades. And now to my final word. New Zealand's right-wing free speech champions are the biggest political hypocrites. The Party of Free Speech, the ACT Party, are launching an assault on free speech by personally attacking any critic of their despicable regulatory standards bill. The hypocrisy of pretending to protect free speech and then launching an enemies list of critics to attack on social media is really dark and kind of crypto-fascist. With the social media enemies list, ACT are inviting their crazed, foaming, reactionary, racist activists to target these critics and take New Zealand a goose step closer to the hyper-sectarian politics of MAGA's America. Note that ACT aren't countering the arguments against the Regulatory Standards Bill. Instead, they are personalising and targeting critics. Even for ACT, this is a deplorable step towards political violence. That the rest of the political mainstream media are allowing ACT to get away with this is a recognition of how so much of our fourth estate guard dogs have all been neutered into property journalism clickbait, desperately screaming, "It's never been a better time to buy a house," as if their job depended upon it, because in this media environment, it does. ACT should be condemned for this kind of dirty politics, especially from a party who pretends to support free speech. But it isn't, because the fourth estate have given up holding the powerful to account and are watching Married at First Sight instead. Except Auntie Claudette, she's holding the buggers to account. In solidarity, the revolution continues. Ka pai Aotearoa.
The Bradbury Group, New Zealand's best weekly political argument. The Bradbury Group is an independent podcast through the ROVA network, sponsored by Waatea News. After the show, the Bradbury Group enjoys conviviality at 165 Ponsonby Road. Why not pop down, meet the show staff and plot the revolution? That's 165 Ponsonby Road, Tuesday night drinking at its best. Everything on the show is an opinion and should